Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask the Consistory. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia, a member congregation of the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion, or coelc for short. Ask the Consistory is a small mini-series that we do here on the Consistory of the coelc YouTube channel where we answer listener questions. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, someone sent me a question asking me about the real presence, specifically why the words "this is my body" are to be taken literally and not symbolically. Why is it not a metaphor when Jesus says this is my body? And so today we're going to look at why the words "this is my body, this is my blood" are not symbolic or metaphorical. And essentially the thing is that they're just not metaphorical, because that's just not how language works. They aren't a metaphor or a simile or anything like that. This is one of the arguments Luther had with Zwingli when Zwingli couldn't really explain exactly what a metaphor was. So we look at this this statement, "this is my body," and there are four words there. This is my body. Which words there are metaphorical? This isn't metaphorical. Isn't metaphorical. My isn't metaphorical. Now, body could be metaphorical. This is what Zwingli is arguing. But as we will show, it doesn't work in the context of how Jesus is speaking. To say that when you say "this is my body," to try and say that that's a metaphor that's just not proper grammar or English. It's not proper grammar, or Greek is in the Greek. It doesn't work like that. Language doesn't work the way Zwingli and the Calvinists and the Reforms try to argue that it should work. And so we're going to look at this in a bit more detail. We'll start with the word "this." Is the word "this" symbolic? No. The word "this" is referring to the bread and the wine that Jesus is holding. This isn't a symbol, this is a metaphor. When he says "this bread" here, he's not talking about a metaphorical bread or symbolical bread. He's talking about literal bread in his hand. So this is not metaphorical or symbolic. Now we turn to the word "is." Now this is the word that Luther and Zwingli debated over. Zwingli said that "is" means represents, whereas Luther says "is" means is. See, Zwingli said that the word was just a figure of speech, and that it really means represents. This is kind of the metaphor that Zwingli talks about. However, when Jesus wants to say that something is a metaphor, or that something represents something, he uses the correct grammar, using words such as "like" or "compared to." For example, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house. Or the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast. Here, Jesus wants you to know that something represents something, and so he actually uses the correct grammar there. The kingdom is like a master. He doesn't say the kingdom is a master. Like a master is represents. Is a master means it literally is something. See, when Jesus says, "I am the Son of God," or when Peter says, "you are the Christ," they don't mean you represent the Son of God, or you are a symbol of the Christ. They mean you literally are these things. I am, you are, that is, that isn't metaphorical, that isn't representative, that literally is what it is. If I say, "this is a tree," I'm talking about a literal tree. This tree is a tree. I'm not talking metaphorically. So this leads us then into body, which we're going to get to, of the argument that, what about when Jesus says, "I am the vine"? I mean, Jesus isn't a literal plant, so just because he says "I am" doesn't necessarily mean he literally is a vine. However, you're misunderstanding the structure of the sentence here. Jesus doesn't say "I am a vine," that is, a plant. Jesus doesn't say "I am a vine," I'm a plant, or "I am a door," I'm a big wooden thing that swings on hinges. No, Jesus says, "I am the vine. I am the door." What he's talking about here is that he's referring to the parable that he just mentioned. In the parable of the vine, Jesus is using this parabolic story about vines and branches, and then he says, "I am the vine. You are the branches." Not saying that he is literally a vine and that we are literally branches, but that in this story about a vine and its branches, Jesus is represented by the vine and we are represented by the branches. He is the vine of the story. We are the branches of the story. See, there's a difference between saying "I am a vine," "I am the vine." It's the same way when we look at the account of Nathan the prophet coming to King David, and he tells this story about a man who kills his neighbor's sheep. He then turns to David and says, "You are the man." Now, he isn't saying that David literally went and killed his neighbor's sheep, but that David is the man of this symbolic story. So the story is metaphorical, the story is symbolic, the story is parabolical, but David literally is the man of the story. So that is how language works. That is when you want to say that something is metaphorical, that you're not saying David literally is this man who went and killed the sheep, but he is the man of the story, just as Jesus isn't literally a plant, but he is the vine in the parable about the vine and the branches. And then this leads us then to the word "my body." Now, in the epistles, Paul does call the church the body of Christ. But this doesn't mean that Christians are literally the flesh and blood of the man Jesus. This is because in this context, Paul is using the term body of Christ in a symbolic way. He means that the church is like a body, and the body that it is representing is Christ's body. But during the Last Supper, Jesus doesn't employ this same figure of speech. He doesn't use the words in a parabolic way. He is speaking in a direct, literal way when he says, "This is my body." See, if I give you a glass of water and say, "This is water," I don't mean this is a representation of water, or this is symbolically water. I mean, in this glass is literally water. However, if I were to get a map, and I were to point at a blue patch and say, "This is water," what I literally mean is this, what I actually mean is this represents water. Now, in both situations, I say the same words, "This is water," but context is different. When I'm holding a literal glass of water in my hand saying, "This is water," I'm talking about the literal water in my hand. When I am pointing to a map, I'm talking about a representation of water, because the map is not a literal landscape. The map is not a physical landscape. The map is a representation of a landscape. Just as the story about the vine and the branches is not a literal event, but it is a story that represents something, so too a map is not a literal landscape, it's a representation of a landscape. So when I point to the map and say, "This is water," I do mean this is a representation of water, but that's only because in the context I am talking about a representation of the landscape. So context is crucial when understanding this. When Paul is talking symbolically about the church being the body of Christ, he is employing symbolic language. When Jesus is holding a piece of bread in his hand saying, "This bread here in my hand is my body," he's not talking metaphorically, he's not talking symbolically, he's talking about the literal physical bread in his hand. And so I hope that kind of answers the question. I don't really have much more I can say on this topic, so I hope that answers the question. Thank you for watching. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.